right, so I'm going to try and run through this rather quickly because I stand before you in lunch, and my lunch too. Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about some basic terms around compensation. I do not have a lot of slides on negotiation, which is the presentation I did last year, but I can take a couple questions on that. And so before we start, I just want to say these are things that I'm going to share with you that are things that I learned as I progressed in my career. They are terms and basic concepts. I'm not giving anybody any advice. I'm just sharing the way that I do things, right? And some of the things that I've learned. So here we go. All right, here's what I hope you can take away from this talk today. Some of the basic concepts around compensation and benefits, salary expectations, and going through that, why pay is more than just your paycheck, some of the intrinsic values that you should consider about benefits, employment status, which I think is an important distinction for you all to understand as you get started in your career, and then lastly, performance and sort of evaluations and feedback. Again, not a lot of negotiation, but I'm happy to take a couple of questions about that. Okay, so the first thing is that typically when we start in our career, we look at pay and we care very much about that biweekly paycheck, but that is actually not the whole picture, right? There are other things that we need to consider when evaluating an offer or when evaluating what pay looks like for a role. So before we get started into some of those details, let's kind of level our expectations a little bit and talk about some context. And so we're in an economic climate, right, that's markedly different than it was 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, even as we were going through the pandemic. And you should also consider the stage of your career, where you're starting out, right, and what the opportunities are when you're 1 to 2 jobs into your career versus the 10 or 20 I'm into in mine. It's a slightly different picture, right? Second point on here, understand what the state of your industry is. And I asked this in the last seminar. Who here has like a good grasp of what is happening in the media and entertainment sector at the moment? Max in the back, some other folks there, some folks here. Shout out, what are some of the things that are happening? Exactly, all of those things. My advice to you all here today is that everybody should be going home and understanding exactly everything that has happened with each and every one of the media and entertainment companies that you believe you're interested in working at, right? You should understand what their strategy is in terms of expansion. You should understand what their goal is. Is it a subscription business? Is it a streaming business? Is it a cable news business? Like, you should really understand, beyond the particular employment that you want, what the company you're going to work at really is configuring as their economic strategy for success, particularly as all of this contraction and consolidation in the sector is taking place. It is invaluable. People want to hire folks that understand the business that they're going into. And so you should really be that kind of an employee, right? Okay. Then the last 2 points on here is I think you should consider what matters to you most. Is pay really the only thing that matters to you? Are you happy to work at a place that pays you a little bit more money, but like your manager is a mean person that doesn't value your contributions? Or do you want the opposite of that? Make a little less money, but work at a place where people really value who you are and what you bring to the table. And lastly, understand your goal, right? Like, what is your goal in getting paid a certain amount of money or working at a certain place or for your career or your aspirations? Like, who are you trying to be in this world of work? You're more than just a paycheck, right? Like, you're a person who has some value and a mission in life that you want to fulfill. Okay, so let's talk about this sort of paycheck piece. And compensation really also is about the benefits that your employer or potential employer might be offering you. And those benefits, they have intrinsic value. It costs an employer some money to provide health insurance. That costs money. And just because that money doesn't go into your pocket doesn't mean it is not a benefit, right, that you are getting at a subsidized cost, or in some cases even for free. And I know you all are considerably younger and in better health than I am. And health benefits may not be the thing that you think is so important, but any manner of things can happen in a lifetime, and that is an important benefit. And the cost of that, I think, needs to be something that we all pay attention to. There are other things. It's not just about healthcare, right? It's also about things like free city bike service, which I happen to get at my job. Every time I use a city bike, I use it for free. I think it's pretty cool, right? Other companies will do things like you've heard of the Googles, free everything in the cafeteria. You could get your clothes pressed. Those things have value. They have intrinsic value, right? And that is part of sort of this total rewards philosophy, which is a term that HR executives use a lot, which is really to think about what is the totality of ways in which we could reward our employees for their work. It's not just about your paycheck. There are other things that form part of that as well. So keep that in mind. Okay, so here's sort of the three things coming together. Look beyond your pay. What are some of the other benefits, right, that you are getting with that offer letter? What is your employer saying that that they're compensating you with in addition to that? There are also perks that are part of benefits. You know, when I worked at, a long time ago now, not that long, at Time Warner, I would get, free museum membership. I'd go to the Whitney and pay no money. I mean, it costs $29 on a good day to get into the Whitney Museum, right? That's a perk, that's a benefit, that's money that's going in my pocket, or not in my pocket, it's not coming out of my pocket, for example, right? And then lastly, I would say, what is the culture and values of the place that you're working at, right? Are you happy to work at an Altria group? Does anybody know what that is? It's the company that makes cigarettes and liquor. Are you happy to work at that place, right? Does that align with your values? Or are you more of the type of person who would be happier working at a different organization? I'll use in this case my company, Justworks, that proactively supports reproductive rights. Personal choices. I'm not saying that you should do one or the other, but consider how the company you're working for or potentially are working with aligns with your values, because that will have an impact on your career trajectory, your happiness, and your overall ability to earn and grow. Okay, so I want to talk about another type of benefit that folks, in addition to healthcare, which is the most common one, that a lot of folks won't be familiar with. These are all financial instruments of additional compensation that organizations may offer to folks depending on what level you may be. All of this stuff can be Googled. None of this is private information. So at the bottom of this chart are restricted stock units. These are grants of stock for a company. Let's call the company AT&T. Their marker is T on the stock market, and every so often an employee could get a grant of valued at X amount of dollars that vests over what they call a cliff, meaning you don't get all of the money at once. It sort of like becomes available to you little by little. So that's a restricted stock unit. There may be some forms of employment or offers where you may get a small grant. It vests over a cliff. If you stay there for 4 years, you get the full value of the money. You sell those shares, and then you get the money. You may not be making money up front on a biweekly basis, but you have some incentive on a yearly basis to make some additional money. Options are very commonly offered at tech companies or firms before they go public. The most famous case of people becoming millionaires, multimillionaires through options are Facebook and Google employees. Those people were making very little money when they first started at those companies and then became millionaires once the valuation of those companies took off, right? Another thing to consider as you're evaluating. Not everyone's going to hit the lotto every year with another Google, but it's another form of compensation that has potential value in the future. Bonuses, everybody knows what a bonus is, right? It's like additional money you get on a yearly basis based usually on performance. We will cover that in a minute. Long-term incentives are usually, individual arrangements of additional money to either retain employees or to try and lure employees to stay a little bit longer once you sign a contract. So in some cases, it may not be uncommon. I've had this before in my life where you took a job, and to make sure that you stay there for at least 3 years, they will build in some additional money that comes in addition to the compensation after year 1, 2, and 3. So a long-term incentive, an incentive to stay. And then 401ks. Does everybody know what a 401k is? Roughly, if not, you should be Googling it and familiarizing yourself with it. If you work at a nonprofit, I believe it's called a 457B. There's also 457A and some others. But it basically is money that you save for retirement on a pre-tax basis. So it comes out of your paycheck before the government calculates how much money goes to them in taxes. I was talking with the other group. I'm sure a lot of people in this room are familiar with the wealth gap that exists with, sort of people of color as compared to their white cisgender male counterparts, right? One of the biggest instruments of the gap in that is retirement benefits. 401k is really important way for you to secure your future. A lot of companies will also have a matching grant for your 401k benefits where you contribute $1 and they match it dollar for dollar. In some cases, they'll even match it at a greater amount, right? The other thing I didn't include in here is pensions, which are lovely and so rare these days. But if you get to go to a company with a pension, that's usually a really great instrument to secure your financial well-being over the long term. And the reason that it's important for you to consider sort of some of these longer-term ways of compensation, especially 401ks and RSUs, is because they enable you to negotiate further down the line in your career for more and more benefits, right? So I just want you all to, I think my message really is just, don't just look at your paycheck. When you get an offer, don't just focus on, am I getting $120,000 versus $125,000? Focus also on all of the other things that may be available to you as employees in terms of benefits, right? Including perks. Okay, performance. Sorry, I'm rushing because I know we don't have that much time. Performance. The value of hard work. So typically, big companies will have a employee performance evaluation process. It is tied to goals that the company may set, and then individual goals that your manager or the person who you report into will set for you. And those are used to then evaluate, further compensation, opportunities for advancement, right? My basic advice here is sort of these tips, and I want to focus on 2 and 4. Number 2 on here is really about that performance is not like what you do 2 months before the performance evaluation, right? It's something that you should be working at throughout the year of that evaluation. And the advice that I like to give folks is to have that conversation on a regular basis with the person that you report into, to have a regular check-in about how you're advancing against those goals and not leaving it to the last day or the last quarter of that compensation or performance evaluation review. And then the last point on here is about receiving feedback with an open mind. There have been a couple of studies, namely the Center for Talent Innovation, which I think now is called COQUAL, about the difference that exists in advancement opportunities, in particular for Black women versus their cisgender male counterparts, white counterparts, about being able to receive feedback and the importance of receiving feedback and not being defensive and absorbing it with an open mind. And it is critical that you establish a conversation. This is why point number 2 is very important with your manager, so that you're able to have those conversations on a regular basis and you understand how your performance is being perceived, and you engage in a conversation of like a constant feedback loop rather than a one-time event where you sort of are all of a sudden surprised by things that may not be working. I want to just sort of give a little caveat. Performance reviews are flawed in very many ways. I am not here to suggest that there are perfect measures of how employees are performing. They are inherently biased and usually not well structured in favor of people of color. But nonetheless, it is something that exists in your environments of employment, and it is something that you ought to start learning how to navigate. Okay, so that is my basic piece on all of the sort of performance review, pay and benefits. And now I just want to talk a little bit about sort of your employment status, right? And if you're starting early in your career, you may be familiar with, of course, internship opportunities, but there are other ways in which employers will bring in new talent into an organization. Sometimes that may be as a contractor, right? So it's like a limited term engagement. You're not truly an employee of the company, but you're a contractor. It's an opportunity for these businesses to test, and sometimes they lead to full-time employment. You can also be hired into the company as a temp employee, and you sort of have an email that's from the company and you're there, but you're a temporary employee, not a full-time employee. That's another way in which an offer may come to you that is different than full employment. All of these different statuses have different sets of benefits related to them, right? So it's important that you understand like actually what's being offered to you in terms of employment, like on what status, what benefits go with it, what the terms of it are, and how, you know, sort of what the ability for you is to continue to grow in your career by understanding that. So it's also really important that when you get an offer that you understand, or even when you're applying, what kind of employment you're sort of seeking. Because it may seem on all the websites like it's a full-time employee, but it may be a temporary basis employment or a contract or something else, right? Okay, so these are the basics. I kind of ran through it a little quickly, but I wanted us to have time for questions before we go to lunch, okay? All right, fire away. In the black suit, and then we'll come to you in the front.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, so you're basically saying that we have to negotiate a salary when we start, but what if you don't really have an experience before? How would you really go about negotiating that?
Yeah, I'm definitely not saying that you should negotiate a salary. I think that, you know, once you get an offer, that is the moment when you should consider whether that offer of a salary feels fair to you. And the way in which you should make that determination is by doing some research about what other equivalent pay is for that role across the industry. And that if you want to negotiate what you feel is a fair salary, that you should do it on the basis of that and not just sort of like a gut instinct of wanting money. But as a general rule, you know, and this is my personal opinion, you all can do as you wish. As a general rule, I don't think that every situation is necessarily a situation in which it is inherent to negotiate salary. I think it just depends on a lot of factors. Sorry, I was going to go here and then back there. You.
I had a pretty similar question. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize there was one here. Thank you. Hello? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a pretty similar question. I was also wondering if you are in a situation where you feel like it would be fair to maybe negotiate a little bit on your salary, if you feel like you're being offered a little less than maybe is the standard. Do you have any tips or strategies on how to do that respectfully? But be also assertive at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of advice on the internet that you could get that would be very similar to what I would give you. I think for me, the note is that the idea is for you to get to yes, for your employer to get to yes, and for you to get to yes. And so your approach really should be about, you know, I'm excited about this opportunity. I think it's really great. I want to join you. would like to talk a little bit about compensation with the goal of getting to yes for you and me, and this is what I think would be fair. And then I just have some flexibility. They might say no. And so you need to understand if they say no, if you're going to be willing to accept what they offered originally and be happy with that or not, right? But I think these situations vary. I wish I could give you like a 1-2 step of like, if you do this, it'll work every time, but it's not quite like that. You also have to feel out whether your employer is in a state where they're willing to negotiate with you about salary or not. Because I have seen cases where offers were pulled because somebody negotiated too aggressively. So you also have to have a little bit of a sensibility of like how much room there is to maybe make that ask. The one steadfast rule that I would give folks is that you should not negotiate salary before you get an offer. In the back, in the...
Hi. So you mentioned a little bit about the wealth gap, and study-wise, there's a lot of data that points that women of color and people of color are more likely to accept jobs that are underpaid and less likely to negotiate. Once, for example, you already have the offer or you're in a position where you're ready to scale up, what are some of the ways that you would recommend to bring up if you found that your peers are making more money because they negotiated at the beginning? Or like, what are some of the ways that like, because it's very much of an internal battle. I think that there's a lot of times where, and I've been in this position where it's like, grateful to be here. Thank you so much. I'm gonna take this and run with it. What are some of like the strategies that we can kind of walk away with to be able to like deal with situation where it might be uncomfortable to bring up pay discrepancies or where you know your worth and you want to be able to sort of scale up, knowing that some of your coworkers might be making more just because they asked for more?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot in that question. Let me start with, first, New York City passed a pay transparency law. Everybody should be aware of it. It goes into effect in September. The law will do some things and it will help in some ways, and in other ways it won't, because it only requires employers to give a range of salary of compensation, and a range can be anything. A range can be between 0 and $1 million, and a range can be between 5 and 20, right? And different companies have interpreted that range in different ways. The discrepancy exists if you work at a company that has an HR department and you figured out that you're making less than your counterparts for work that is of similar quality and similar work, right? Because if you're not performing well and you ask for the same salary that someone who's performing well is doing, that may not go very well. Then you should like formally bring that question and that query to your HR department is the place where you should start. It should not be a one-woman battle against, your manager and the rest of your organization about it. There are formal ways in which to bring up those discrepancies. The pay deficit that a lot of women of color in particular, it's most acute for Latino women and then Black women, is real and it exists. I think that's what the transparency law is trying to address. I'm not saying that you shouldn't negotiate. I'm just saying that when you negotiate, it should be based on something that is real and some information and a context that provides a good argument for that. Because when it's not, then it can be very disappointing for you to negotiate a salary, right? And I've, sort of had questions in the past from folks that are like, I think I should be making $150,000. It's like not a good reasoning for why you should negotiate salary, right? A good reasoning is this was the range. I have these numbers of years of experience. At the top of the range, it says, 7 years of experience. I have 6 years of experience. I should be closer to the top of the range. This is the average in the industry for people of this level of experience. Like that's the way in which you build your argument. And also, like, there's no silver bullet, right? Like, I've been in so many jobs where I know I've been getting paid $20,000 or $25,000 less than somebody else, and I've just had to wait for the moment to eclipse that, right? It's not always going to happen at the moment when you get an offer. There may be an opportunity at another moment in your career or your tenure in that organization to also bring up that argument. So it's not like a one and done kind of thing. I think that there are other opportunities to negotiate salary that go beyond the moment of you getting an offer. Okay, in the back, and then we'll come here to you.
So, hi, I have a question regarding to a new law that I came across, basically saying that disabled people are legally allowed to be paid lower than what they're worth. So how do you interact with that?
So I didn't hear, you said that who will be allowed to be paid less?
Disabled people.
There's no way there's a law that says that.
Yeah.
There may be.
I can show you the article.
Yeah, there may be instances where disabled people are being paid less and employers are violating the law by doing that. But there, to my knowledge, isn't a law that says that disabled people should be paid less. I'm also not an employment lawyer or employment or HR specialist, so I can't answer that question beyond saying that that shouldn't happen.
Is this on? Okay, it's on. My question is not for negotiating or anything like that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just wanted to clear the air. My question is more on performance appraisals and how to really go about having a conversation with your boss when the boss not necessarily is mean, but can be a little sarcastic.
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes, like even trying to be open-minded and also just trying to be adaptable as a person when you're in an environment where it's kind of like sarcasm is like, it's just the way that the person is. I think it's hard trying to like navigate a conversation and not take it personally, where it's like, you know, this is my work and, you know, I want to make sure that I'm putting my best foot forward. So how would you go about having a conversation like that?
I mean, I think if I were in that situation, I have to go back many years before thinking of having been in that situation. I mean, I think that I would kind of check the person and just say it, but in a polite and respectful way as you can, which is, if I were in your shoes, I would say, let's pick on Max because he's back there, you know. Max, I really care about my career projection. When we talk about my performance, I sense that I'm engaging in a level of seriousness in this conversation, and I'm not feeling the same level of seriousness and commitment from you in having that conversation. And I'd like us to reset and talk about the ways in which you and I can agree to ways in which you can fairly evaluate my performance and what I need to do to continue to upskill in my job and progress in my career. Just, you know, it's just... Thank you so much. I do appreciate your sense of humor. I just want us to put it on pause for the moment while we talk about my career aspirations. So it's just like you can have the conversations and you can be direct. Just try and find a way to kind of like disarm the situation, if you can, from emotion. I'm conflicted even as I give you this advice because obviously, like, I'm a woman of color working in corporate America. There are so many ways in which it can be such a dismissive experience for women of color, for men of color, for people who are differently abled, who have disability. I mean, it can be very hard, and I'm not trying to dismiss that. All I'm trying to do is give you some advice that helps you to navigate some of that while we are in the process of changing the workplace for the better. And
I have a question. So basically, let's say that you have your grad degree. How do you negotiate your salary knowing that you have a master's and, yeah?
yeah, I mean, I think the same way, right? Because the qualifications of the job, if they require a master's degree, will tell you sort of what you need. So if you're someone who requires a master's degree and X number of years of experience and this type of experience, you should know whether you're like toward the top of that range or the bottom of that range, right? And then again, looking across the industry, what is pay for that average job, and talk about what you think you deserve based on sort of what was offered, the range, and your qualifications as compared to those two things. So same basic level of advice.